Bellerophon, Pegasus, and the Chimaera. Once in the old times, for all the strange things which I tell you about happened long before anybody can remember, a fountain gushed out of a hillside in the marvelous land of Greece. One day, a handsome young man named Bellerophon drew near the fountain. In his hand he held a bridle, studded with brilliant gems and adorned with a golden bit. Seeing a country fellow and a young child near the fountain, he paused and asked, "Will you be kind enough to tell me whether this fountain has any name?" "Yes, it is called the Fountain of Pyrene," answered the child. "And my grandmother says it is a magical fountain, for it was once a beautiful woman who melted away into tears when her son was killed by the arrows of the goddess Artemis." "So, this then is Pyrene. I have come from a faraway country to find this very spot." "Pray, have you lost a horse?" asked the country fellow. "I see you carry a bridle in your hand." "I have lost no horse," said Bellerophon with a smile, "but I happen to be seeking a famous one, which, as wise people have informed me, must be found hereabouts, if anywhere. Do you know whether the winged horse Pegasus still haunts the Fountain of Pyrene? A snow-white steed with beautiful silvery wings, as wild and as swift as any eagle that soared into the clouds. They say he used to be seen drinking the delicious water and rolling himself upon the soft grass." The country fellow only laughed. Bellerophon turned to the child. "Well, my child, I suppose you have often seen the winged horse?" "That I have," answered the child very readily. "I saw him yesterday, and many times before. I often come here to play, and sometimes, when I look down into the water, I see the image of the winged horse. I wish he would come down and take me on his back, but if I so much as stir to look at him, he flies away out of sight." Putting his faith in the child, Bellerophon haunted about the Fountain of Pyrene, continually on the watch, hoping he should see either the reflected image of the winged horse or the marvelous reality. Now Bellerophon was one of the bravest youths in the world, and desired nothing so much as to do some valiant deed, such as would make all mankind admire and love him. In those days, the only way for a young man to distinguish himself was by fighting battles, either with enemies of his country, or with wicked giants, or with troublesome dragons, or with wild beasts. King Iobates had proposed to Bellerophon that he go and fight the Chimaera, a hateful monster which everybody else was afraid of. Bellerophon hesitated not a minute, but assured the king that he would either slay this dreaded Chimaera or perish in the attempt. But as the monster was so swift, he thought he would never win the victory by fighting on foot. The wisest thing he could do was to get the fleetest horse that could anywhere be found. On advice from a seer, he spent the night in the temple of Athena, and she appeared to him in his dreams, saying, "Put this golden bit into the mouth of Pegasus, the winged horse, and he will go whithersoever you choose." One day, after many spent at the fountain, the faithful child whispered, "There, Bellerophon, there is an image in the water. There, sinking lightly down out of that cloud. Bellerophon, do you not see that it is no bird?" Bellerophon caught the child in his arms and shrank back into the shrubbery. "It is he. It is the winged horse, Pegasus." Downward came Pegasus, nearer and nearer, flying in circles, which grew narrower and narrower as he gradually approached the earth. Then, with a last sweep of his silver wings, with so light a pressure as hardly to bend the grass about the fountain, he alighted. and stooping his wild head, began to drink. After thus drinking to his heart's content, he began to roll over and over on the ground. And then when he had enough of rolling over and over, Pegasus, like any other horse, put out his forelegs in order to rise from the ground. Suddenly, Bellerophon darted from his hiding place and leaped astride. Yes, there he sat, on the back of the winged horse. But what a bound did Pegasus make when he first felt the weight of mortal man. Before he had time to draw a breath, Bellerophon found himself 500 feet aloft and still shooting upward. The winged horse snorted and trembled with anger and terror. Upward he went, up, until he plunged into the cold, misty bosom of a cloud. Then out of the heart of the cloud, Pegasus shot down like a thunderbolt, as if he meant to dash both himself and his rider headlong against a rock. He put down his head between his legs and turned a somerset 2 miles above the earth. He fluttered his wings so wildly that one of the silver feathers was shaken out and fell to earth and was picked up by the child. But at last, Bellerophon clapped the golden bit of the enchanted bridle between the winged steed's jaws. No sooner was this done than the bridle worked its magic. Pegasus became as manageable as if he had taken food all his life out of Bellerophon's hand. Now, while Pegasus had been doing his utmost to shake Bellerophon off his back, he had flown a very long distance, and they had come within sight of a lofty mountain. They had, in fact, come to the mountainous part of the country Lycia, home of the terrible Chimaera. Being now so near their journey's end, Pegasus flew lower. Peeping over the edge of a cloud, Bellerophon looked down into the shadowy vales. At first there appeared to be nothing remarkable to see, unless it were the 3 spires of smoke which issued from the mouth of a cavern and clambered sullenly into the atmosphere. The smoke had an ugly, sulphurous, stifling scent, which caused Pegasus to snort and Bellerophon to sneeze. They could see the ruins of houses that had been burnt, and here and there the carcasses of dead cattle, strewn about the pastures where they had been feeding. Oh, what mischief, and what mischief, and what mischief this wicked Chimaera has done with its flaming breath, said Bellerophon. But where can the monster be? On looking down into the cavern, Bellerophon saw something. He made a sign to the winged horse. They sank slowly through the air until they were scarcely more than a man's height above the rocky bottom of the valley. Bellerophon beheld a heap of strange and terrible creatures curled up within the cavern. Their bodies lay so close together that Bellerophon and Pegasus could not distinguish them apart. But judging by their heads, one of these creatures was a huge snake, the second a fierce lion, and the third an ugly goat. Bellerophon had found out the Chimaera's cavern. The snake, the lion, and the goat were but one monster, and the 3 spires of smoke came from the nostrils of the 3 heads. Before Bellerophon had time to consider what to do next, the monster flung itself out of the cavern and sprang straight towards him, with its immense claws extended and its snaky tail twisting itself behind. But the winged horse was not to be caught so. In the twinkling of an eye, he was up aloft, halfway to the clouds, snorting with anger. The Chimaera raised itself, with its talons pawing, its 3 heads sputtering fire at Pegasus and his rider. But Pegasus darted down a slant, as swift as the flight of an arrow, right towards the Chimaera's 3-fold head. As horse and rider came within arm's length, Bellerophon made a cut at the monster. It was carried onward by his steed. Wheeling round, he perceived that he had cut the goat's head almost off, so that it dangled downward, quite dead. Well done, my brave Pegasus, cried Bellerophon. "Another stroke like that, and we will stop either its hissing or its roaring." So again they rode, arrows straight at the heads, and with another cut, Bellerophon stopped the roaring. At last, there was only the monstrous snake's head, but it was twice as fierce and venomous as ever before. This time, as Pegasus and Bellerophon approached, the Chimera gave a spring, and flinging itself upon poor Pegasus, clung round him and tied up its snaky tail into a knot. Up flew Pegasus, higher, 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 while still the monster kept its hold. Bellerophon, turning about, found himself face to face with the ugly grimness of the Chimera. But the Chimera was so mad and wild with pain that it did not guard itself. Bellerophon thrust his sword up to the hilt into its cruel heart. Thus it fell out of the sky all aflame, and it being nightfall before it reached the earth, was taken for a shooting star or comet. But at early sunrise, some cottagers were going to their labor, and saw to their astonishment several acres of ground strewn with black ashes. In the middle of the field, there was a heap of whitened bones, a great deal higher than a haystack. Bellerophon bent forward and kissed Pegasus while the tears stood in his eyes. "Back now, my beloved steed," said he, "back to the fountain of Pyrene." When their feet touched earth, Bellerophon said, "Where is that gentle child who used to keep me company, and never lost faith, and never was weary of gazing into the fountain?" "Here I am, dear Bellerophon," said the child softly. "I returned," said Bellerophon, "so that together we can give Pegasus his liberty." So saying, he slipped off the enchanted bridle from the head of the marvelous steed. But Pegasus rested his head on Bellerophon's shoulder and would not be persuaded to take flight. "Well then," said Bellerophon, caressing the airy horse, "thou shalt be with me as long as thou wilt." Then Bellerophon embraced the gentle child and set off to tell King Iobates that the Chimera was destroyed.
Perseus and the Gorgon's Head. Perseus was the son of Danae, who was the daughter of a king. And when Perseus was a very little boy, some wicked people put his mother and himself into a chest and set them afloat on the sea. Danae clasped her child closely to her bosom and dreaded that some big wave would dash its foamy crest over them both. The chest sailed on, and neither sank nor was upset until, when night was coming, it floated near an island, and was entangled in a fisherman's net, and was drawn out high and dry upon the sand. The island was called Seriphus, and was reigned over by King Polydectes, who happened to be the fisherman's brother. The fisherman showed great kindness to Danae and Perseus, and continued to befriend them, until Perseus had grown to be a handsome youth, very strong and active. King Polydectes, who was not good and kind like his brother the fisherman, but extremely wicked, had designs on Danae. He resolved to send Perseus on a dangerous mission, in which he would probably be killed. He spent some time considering what was the most dangerous thing that a young man could possibly undertake to perform. At last he sent for the youthful Perseus. "I am thinking of getting married to the beautiful princess Hippodamia, and it is customary on these occasions to make the bride a present of some far-fetched and elegant curiosity. The bridal gift I have set my heart on presenting is the head of the Gorgon Medusa with the snaky locks, and I depend on you, my dear Perseus, to bring it to me." Perseus left the palace unhappily. He could not bear to tell his mother what he had undertaken to do. Perseus knew that whosoever gazed at the Gorgon was turned instantly from warm flesh and blood into cold and lifeless stone. He knew he must fight with and slay this terrible species of dragon with his eyes shut, or at least without so much as a glance at his enemy. Therefore he girded on his sword and went to a solitary place where he shed tears. But while he was in this sorrowful mood, he heard a voice say beside him, "Perseus, why are you sad?" The stranger was a brisk, intelligent, and remarkably shrewd-looking young man, with a cloak over his shoulders, and an odd sort of cap, a strangely twisted staff, and a short and very crooked sword. "I am not so very sad," said Perseus, "only thoughtful about an adventure that I have undertaken." "Oh," answered the stranger, "well, tell me about it. I have helped many young men through adventures that look difficult. You may call me Quicksilver. That name fits me as well as any other." Perseus told in a few words how the king wanted the head of Medusa with the snaky locks as a bridal gift, and that he, Perseus, was afraid of being turned into stone. "Well, well, let us hope the affair will not turn out so badly," replied Quicksilver. "My sister and myself will do our utmost to bring you safely through this adventure, ugly as it now looks. But first of all, you must polish this shield she has lent you, till you can see your face in it as distinctly as in a mirror." Perseus thought this was an odd beginning for an adventure, but he set to work and scrubbed the shield with such diligence that it quickly shone like the moon at harvest time. Quicksilver looked at it and smiled in approval. Then he took off his own crooked sword and girded it about Perseus. "Now," said Quicksilver, "it is time to find the 3 gray women, and they must tell us where to find the nymphs." "3 gray women? Nymphs?" cried Perseus. "Why should I waste my time with these? Let us go find the Gorgons." "No, no," answered his friend. "There are other things must be done before you can find your way to the Gorgons. Come, let us be stirring." Perseus made no more objections, and followed briskly along beside Quicksilver, who seemed to float a bit above the ground because of the little wings on his shoes. At dusk they came to a wild and desert place. Quicksilver stopped. "Shh! Make no noise. This is just the time and place to meet the 3 gray women. Be careful that they do not see you, for though they have but a single eye among them, it is as sharp-sighted as 6 common eyes. There they come now." Sure enough, there were the 3 gray women. She who chanced to have the eye in her forehead led the other 2 by the hands. It was such a very large, bright, and piercing eye that Perseus was afraid she would see right through the bushes where he and Quicksilver had hidden themselves. "Sister! Sister Scarecrow!" cried the second sister, Nightmare. "You have had the eye long enough. It is my turn now." "No, no," cried the third sister, whose name was Shakejoint. "It is my turn to wear the eye. You 2 want to keep it all to yourselves." "Oh, well," said Sister Scarecrow peevishly, "take it, one of you, but take it quickly, or I will clap it back into my own head." Accordingly, both Nightmare and Shakejoint put out their hands and groped eagerly for the eye. But of course, being blind, they could not easily find it. Whereupon Quicksilver whispered, "Now is your time. Rush out and snatch the eye from Scarecrow's hand." Perseus leapt from behind the bushes and grabbed the prize, but the Grey Women knew nothing of what had happened, each supposing one of her sisters was in possession of the eye. "My good ladies," said Perseus, "I have the honor to hold in my hand your very brilliant and excellent eye." "And who are you?" screamed the Grey Women, for they were terribly frightened. "Give us back our eye!" "Tell them," whispered Quicksilver, "that they shall have back the eye as soon as they direct you where to find the nymphs, where the flying slippers, the magic wallet, and the helmet of darkness." "I heard you," cried Sister Scarecrow, "but I know nothing of nymphs or flying slippers or whatnot." "Nor I," cried the others. But upon the advice of Quicksilver, Perseus would not relent. They at last told Perseus what he wanted to know. Immediately, with the utmost respect, he returned the eye. Quickly, Perseus and Quicksilver set off in quest of the nymphs. The nymphs were very different from the Grey Women, and they looked very kindly at Perseus. They seemed to be acquainted with Quicksilver, and when he told of the adventure which Perseus had undertaken, they brought out the valuable articles. First, they brought out what appeared to be a small purse made of deerskin and beautifully embroidered. This was the magic wallet. Next, they produced a pair of sandals with a nice little pair of wings at the heel of each. But when Perseus put them on, up he popped so buoyant he found it difficult to clamber down again. Last, the good-natured nymphs had the helmet with its tuft of waving plumes, all ready to put upon his head. One moment, there stood Perseus, a beautiful young man with golden hair. But the instant the helmet had descended over his brow, there was no longer any Perseus to be seen. "Where are you, Perseus?" asked Quicksilver. "Why, here, to be sure," answered Perseus. "Can't you see me?" "Excellent," answered his friend. "If I cannot see you, neither can the Gorgons. Now, please remove the helmet and follow me, so that you may learn to use your flying slippers." The two companions flew onward, but as he flew, Perseus was aware of the rustle of clothing close by his side. "That rustling you hear is my sister Athena," explained Quicksilver. "She is coming with us, as I told you she would. We could do nothing without her help. You have no idea how wise she is." When they had come within sight of the great ocean, the invisible Athena spoke. "Look down on the shore of the island beneath us. There are the Gorgons. A pebble dropped from your hand would strike in the midst of them." Straight downward, Perseus perceived a small island, with a sea breaking into white foam all around its rocky shore, except where there was a beach of snowy sand. As he descended toward it, he saw the fierce creatures fast asleep. Luckily, their faces were all hidden, for had he looked one instant at them, he would have fallen heavily out of the air, an image of senseless stone. The moonlight glistened on their steely scales, and on their golden wings, their brazen claws, and the hundreds of snakes that served them as hair. "Now is your time to do the deed," said the goddess Athena, suddenly making herself visible to Perseus. "Be cautious. The middle one is Medusa. Do not look at her, or you will turn to stone. Look at her reflection only in the bright mirror of your shield." Now, whispered the impatient Quicksilver. "Put on the helmet. Be quick. If one of the Gorgons should awake, you are too late." Perseus flew down close to Medusa. There was a savage beauty in that horrible face. Troubled by an ugly dream, she gnashed her white tusks and dug the sand with her brazen claws. The snakes of her hair seemed to feel her dream and writhed fiercely, twined themselves into tumultuous knots, and uplifted 100 hissing, sleeping heads. Medusa unclosed her eyes, but she awoke too late. The sword was sharp, the stroke fell like a lightning flash. The head of the wicked Medusa tumbled from her body. "Admirably done!" cried Quicksilver. "Make haste and clap the head into your magic wallet." To the astonishment of Perseus, the small embroidered wallet, which he had hung about his neck, grew all at once large enough to contain Medusa's head. "Your task is done," said Athena. "Now fly, for the other Gorgons will do their utmost to take vengeance for Medusa's death." At Athena's words, the 2 remaining Gorgons hurtled upward, brandishing their brass talons, gnashing their horrible tusks, and wildly flapping their huge wings. But Perseus, with his winged heels, left them far behind. Perseus flew straight back to the palace, and was immediately ushered into the presence of the king. Polydectes was by no means glad to see him, for he was certain that the Gorgons would have torn the young man to pieces.
"Have you brought me the head of Medusa with the snaky locks? If not, young man, it will cost you your life."
"Yes, your majesty," answered Perseus. "I have brought you the Gorgon's head, snaky locks and all."
"Indeed? Pray, let me see it,"
quoth the evil King Polydectes. "O King Polydectes," cried he, "I am very loath to show you the Gorgon's head."
"Show me the Gorgon's head this instant, or I will cut off your own. Behold it, then!"
Perseus thrust the head back into his wallet, stunned at his deed, but proud that he and his mother need never fear the wicked King Polydectes again.
Theseus and the Minotaur. A long time ago, in the old city of Troezen, at the foot of a lofty mountain, there lived a little boy named Theseus and his mother Aethra. Aethra used to go with little Theseus into a wood and sit down upon a moss-grown rock and there tell her son about his father, King Aegeus, who ruled over a great nation and lived in the famous city of Athens. "Mother," Theseus would ask, "why does not my father come to live with us here?" "Ah, my dear son," answered Aethra, "a monarch has his people to take care of. Your father will never be able to leave his kingdom for the sake of seeing his little boy." "Well then, dear mother," asked the boy, "why cannot I go to the famous city of Athens and tell King Aegeus that I am his son?" "That you will, my son," answered his mother, "as soon as you are big enough to lift this rock upon which we are sitting." So, often and often after this, did Theseus tug and strain at the huge mass of stone, striving, child as he was, to do what a giant could hardly have done. And thus did Theseus grow up into a vigorous youth. The day came when Theseus looked at the stone and said to his mother, "The time has come." Then Theseus bent himself in good earnest to the task and strained every sinew with manly strength and resolution. The great rock stirred. Yes, it raised slowly from the bedded moss and earth, uprooting the shrubs and flowers along with it. Theseus had conquered. His mother smiled upon him through her tears and said, "Yes, Theseus, the time has come, and you must stay no longer at my side. See what King Aegeus, your royal father, has left for you." Beneath the stone, within a roughly made chest, lay a sword with a golden hilt and also a pair of sandals. "That was your father's sword," said Aethra, "and those were his sandals. He said that once you had proved yourself a man by lifting this heavy stone, you were to put on his sandals and gird on his sword so that you might fight giants and dragons as he did in his youth." "I will set out for Athens this very day," cried Theseus. And though his mother warned him of terrible robbers and monsters on the road to Athens, he set off bravely. Late in the evening, Theseus met a villain named Procrustes, who liked to invite weary travelers to lie down on a bed in his cavern. Then, laughing, Procrustes would make the traveler fit the bed by stretching him with chains or lopping off his head and feet. But when Procrustes tried this with Theseus, he suddenly found himself on the bed, and with his gold-hilted sword, Theseus made Procrustes fit his own bed. Farther down the road, another robber, named Siren, was likewise a great scoundrel. He was in the habit of kicking his victims off a high cliff into the sea. Theseus tossed Siren off the very same place, but the sea would not pollute itself by receiving such a bad person. Neither would the earth, once having got rid of him, agree to take him back. So there, between the cliff and the sea, Siren stuck fast in the air. Next, Theseus pursued an enormous sow which was running wild, terrorizing all of the farmers round about. He killed this great creature and gave the carcass to the poor people for bacon. Finally, after clearing the road of monsters and robbers, he reached the city of Athens, a hero. Theseus went straight to the palace and was ushered into the royal apartments. There sat the white-bearded old king on his magnificent throne. Theseus could scarcely wait to see if King Aegeus would recognize him. So eager was he to throw himself into his father's arms. Now, King Aegeus had been gazing earnestly at the young stranger as he approached the throne. There was something that made him feel as if he had seen this youth before. Suddenly, the king cried, "That sword! How came you by it?" "It was my father's sword," replied Theseus. "These were his sandals. But it is only a month since I grew strong enough to lift the heavy stone and take the sword and sandals from beneath it and come to Athens to seek my father." My son," cried King Aegeus. "Come, sit beside me on the throne and tell me of your dear mother and your childhood." Prince Theseus was now in great favor, but one morning he awoke to hear sobs and groans and screams of woe which came from the streets and from every habitation in the city. He put on his clothes as quickly as he could, not forgetting his sandals and gold-hilted sword, and hastened to the king to inquire what it meant. "Alas, my son," quoth King Aegeus, "several years ago we waged war against King Minos of Crete. When we lost, he exacted a terrible tribute. Every year we must send 7 youths and 7 maidens to be devoured by the Minotaur, a hideous creature, part man and part bull. And this is the day for choosing the victims." When Prince Theseus heard the story, he straightened himself up and said, "Let the people of Athens this year draw lots for only 6 young men instead of 7. I will myself be the 7th, and let the Minotaur devour me if he can. Oh, my dear son, cried King Aegis, why should you expose yourself to this horrible fate? It is because I am a prince, your son, and the rightful heir of your kingdom that I freely take upon me the calamity of your subjects, answered Theseus. The old king shed tears, but consented to let him go. So a vessel was got ready and rigged with black sails, and Theseus, with 6 other young men and 7 beautiful damsels, came down to the harbor to embark. My beloved son, said the king, observe that the sails of this vessel are black. As long as I live, I shall creep daily to the top of yonder cliff to watch if there be a sail upon the sea. If by some happy chance you escape the jaws of the Minotaur, promise me you will tear down these dismal sails and hoist others that shall be bright as the sunshine. Theseus promised that he would do so. On board, the mariners trimmed the vessel's black sails to the wind, which was pretty much made up of the sighs that everybody kept pouring forth on this sad occasion. But by and by, when they had got fairly out to sea, there came a stiff breeze from the northwest and drove them along as merrily as if they had been going on the most delightful errand imaginable. After many days, the high blue mountains of Crete began to show themselves among the far-off clouds. And as they drew closer, they beheld a human figure, gigantic in size, moving mechanically along the margin of the island, an enormous brass club on his shoulder. What is this wonder? Theseus asked the captain. It is Talus, the man of brass. They say he was hammered out for King Minos by the god Hephaestus himself. As they drew near, the brazen figure spoke.
Whence came you, strangers?
From Athens.
On what errand?
We bring the 7 youths and the 7 maidens to be devoured by the Minotaur.
Pass!
No sooner had they entered the harbor than guards of King Minos came to usher the young men and damsels to the palace. One after another, King Minos called these pale, frightened youths and sobbing maidens to his footstool and gave them each a poke in the ribs to see if they were in good health. But when his eyes rested on Theseus, the king looked at him more attentively, because his face was calm and brave. Young man, are you not appalled at the certainty of being devoured by this terrible Minotaur? I have offered my life in a good cause, and therefore I give it freely and gladly, answered Theseus. But I tell thee to thy face, King Minos, thou art a more hideous monster than the Minotaur himself. Ah, do you think me so? Cried the king. Tomorrow at breakfast time, you shall have an opportunity of judging which is the greater monster. Take them away, guards, and let this free-spoken youth be the Minotaur's first morsel. Near the king's throne stood his daughter, Ariadne. She was a beautiful and tender-hearted maiden who looked at these poor doomed captives and wept. She felt their lives were needlessly thrown away to be eaten up by a creature who, no doubt, would have preferred a fat ox or even a large pig. And when she beheld the brave, spirited figure of Prince Theseus bearing himself so calmly, she flung herself at the king's feet and besought him to set all the captives free, especially this one young man. Peace, foolish girl, answered King Minos. What hast thou to do with an affair like this? Go water thy flowers, and think no more of these Athenians. Deep in the dungeon, the 7 maidens and 6 of the young men soon sobbed themselves to sleep. But Theseus was not like them. He felt he had the responsibility of all their lives upon him, so he kept himself awake and paced to and fro across the gloomy dungeon. Just before midnight, the door was softly unbarred, and gentle Ariadne showed herself with a torch in her hand. "Are you awake, Prince Theseus?" she whispered. "Yes," answered Theseus. "With so little time to live, I do not choose to waste any of it in sleep." "Then follow me," said Ariadne, "and tread softly." She opened all the doors and led him forth from the darksome prison into the moonlight. "Theseus," said the maiden, "you can now get on board your vessel and sail away for Athens." "No," answered the young man, "I will never leave Crete unless I first slay the Minotaur and save my companions and deliver Athens from this cruel tribute." "I knew this would be your resolution," said Ariadne. "Come then, with me, brave Theseus. Here is your own sword. You will need it, and pray heaven you may use it well." Then she led Theseus along by the hand until they reached a high marble wall. It seemed to have no door, nor any windows, but rose up lofty and mysterious. Ariadne pressed a particular block of marble, and it yielded, disclosing an entrance. "We are now," said Ariadne, "in the famous labyrinth which Daedalus built before he made himself a pair of wings and flew away from our island like a bird. Were we to take but a few steps from the doorway, we might wander about all our lifetime and never find our way back." "But how shall I ever find the Minotaur?" asked Theseus, "if the labyrinth so bewilders me?" "Follow the Minotaur's roar," whispered Ariadne. "By and by, through the windings of the labyrinth, you will find him. Take the end of this silken string. I will hold the other end. And then, if you win the victory, it will lead you again to this spot. Farewell, brave Theseus." Theseus had not taken 5 steps when he lost sight of Ariadne, and in 5 more his head was growing dizzy. But still he went on. He followed the dreadful roar of the Minotaur, which now grew louder and louder, and Theseus fully expected to come close upon him at every new zigzag and wiggle of the path. And at last, in an open space, at the very center of the labyrinth, he did discern the hideous creature. The Minotaur, turning suddenly about, caught sight of Theseus and instantly lowered his horrible sharp horns. At the same time, he belched forth a tremendous roar in which there were words of human language.
"Rats with human bleed! I'll stick my horns through you and toss you 50 feet high and eat you when you come down."
"Come on then, and try it," answered Theseus. The monster, in his first headlong rush, missed Theseus by a hair's breadth and broke one of his horns short off against the stone wall. After this, the two stood valiantly up to one another and fought sword to horn for a long while. At last, the Minotaur made a run at Theseus and flung him down, but Theseus leapt up and caught the monster off his guard. Fetching a sword stroke at him with all his force, he hit him upon the neck and made his bull head skip 6 yards from his human body. The battle was ended. As Theseus leaned upon his sword to take breath, he felt a twitch of the silken cord, for all through the terrible encounter he had held it fast in his left hand. Eager to let Ariadne know of his success, he followed the guidance of the thread and soon found himself at the entrance of the labyrinth. "Thou hast slain the monster," cried Ariadne. "Thanks to thee, dear Ariadne," answered Theseus, "I return victorious." "Then," said Ariadne, "we must quickly summon thy friends and get them and thyself on board the vessel before dawn. If my father finds thee here, he will avenge the Minotaur." When all the captives were on board, Prince Theseus lingered, holding Ariadne's hand. "Dear maiden," said he, "thou wilt surely go with us. Thou art too gentle and sweet for such an iron-hearted father as King Minos." "No, Theseus," said Ariadne, pressing his hand and then stepping back. "I cannot go with you. My father is old and has nobody but myself to love him. At first he will be angry, but by and by he will rejoice that no more lives are being taken. Now farewell, and heaven bless you." In the joy of their homeward journey, the young folks never once remembered to hoist sunshine sails in place of the black ones. Thus the vessel returned like a raven, and poor King Aegeus, who watched day after day from the top of a cliff, beheld the fatal blackness of the sails. He concluded that his dear son, whom he loved so much, had been eaten by the Minotaur. And so he flung himself off the cliff into the sea. This was melancholy news for Prince Theseus when he stepped ashore and found himself king of all the country. However, he sent for his mother, and by taking her advice in matters of state, became a very excellent monarch and was greatly beloved by his people.
Cadmus and the Dragon's Teeth. One day, long ago, the 4 children of King Agenor of Phoenicia were at play together in a meadow by the sea. They were the brothers Cadmus, Phoenix, and Celix, and their little sister, Europa. On this particular day, a splendid butterfly appeared, and the brothers set off in pursuit of it.
"It looks like a flower with wings."
Europa, a bit tired, sat back among the flowers and closed her eyes. And when she opened them again, she saw before her a beautiful snow-white bull. Where had it come from? At first she was frightened, but it was so gentle and playful that she soon forgot how big and strong it was, and offered it blades of grass from her own hand. And when it lay down, she took the flower garlands from her own neck and hung them on its neck, and wound them around the great bull's horns. It also seemed to want her to ride on its broad back. Why not, thought Europa, leaping nimbly onto it. Suddenly the bull gave a great leap in the air, almost throwing Europa to the ground. Then it rushed madly straight toward the sea. Europa called in vain for her brothers.
"Cadmus, Celix, Phoenix."
By the time the boys reached the shore, the bull's snowy head could hardly be seen in the white-capped billows, and Europa seemed swallowed up by the wide blue sea. Cadmus, Phoenix, and Celix went sorrowfully home to tell their father that a white bull had carried off their sister and swam with her over the sea. King Agenor was beside himself with grief for his favorite child. He cried out,
Begone. Enter my presence no more until you come leading my little Europa by the hand.
Queen Telephassa embraced her sons and said, Alas, my dear children, if I should lose you too, as well as my little Europa, what would become of me? Then the queen, taking her 3 sons by the hand, and accompanied by their friend Theseus, set off on a quest for Europa, a quest which turned out to be a great deal longer than they dreamed. They went here, there, and everywhere, traveling a long way, passing over mountains and rivers, and sailing over seas. Always, they asked if any person could tell them what had become of Europa. The good people would pause in their labors and look very much surprised, but nobody had seen a little girl dressed like a princess and mounted on a snow-white bull. Their own princely robes grew tattered and torn, and they exchanged them for the clothes that ordinary people wore. Indeed, they soon looked more like a gypsy family than a queen and 3 princes and a young nobleman. The years followed one another in this fashion until the boys were quite grown up and had sprouted soft new beards. One after another, they grew weary of this never-ending quest, with never a place to sit down a while and no place to call their home. At length they said to each other, "It is such a dreary time since we lost little Europa. We have all forgotten how she looked. Indeed, if we were to find her, she would now be a woman grown and would look upon us as strangers." Soon after, the young men dropped out one by one. They each found themselves pleasant spots in which to build habitations, and in the place where each one stopped, a city grew up. Finally, the quest was left to Queen Telephassa and Cadmus. One morning, the queen, who had grown weaker and weaker, called Cadmus to her side.
My son, my pilgrimage is over. You must make me a grave here and lay my weary frame into it. But do not grieve for me. If my little Europa is indeed dead, I shall soon be joyfully reunited with her. If she is still here, perhaps the oracle at Delphi can tell you where and how to find her.
Cadmus grieved that his mother should be taken from him, but after performing his last sorrowful duty, he set out on the road for the famous oracle of Delphi, as his mother had instructed. He knelt above the mysterious hole on the famous mountainside and asked, "Sacred oracle of Delphi, whither shall I go next in quest of my sister Europa?" A rushing of air came from the hole and seemed to form the words, "Seek her no more, seek her no more, seek her no more." "What then shall I do?" cried Cadmus.
Follow the cow, follow the cow, follow the cow. Where the stray cow lies down, there is your home.
Cadmus turned away and thought himself no wiser than when he came. He cared little what might happen to him, so he took the first path that offered itself and walked along it in sorrow and dejection. After a time, he beheld a brindled cow. She had been lying down by the wayside, but when she caught sight of Cadmus, she got leisurely to her feet and began to move along ahead of him. Presently, it occurred to Cadmus that this might be the cow foretold to him by the oracle. "Hey, Brindle, hey!" called Cadmus. "Stop, my good cow!" He wanted to come up next to her to see if she looked different from any other cow. Still the cow trudged on, whisking her tail, but always keeping just ahead of Cadmus. If he walked slowly, so did the brindled cow. If he quickened his pace, the cow went so much the faster. Cadmus decided that this must indeed be a magical cow. So whenever they reached a particularly pleasant spot, he looked around eagerly to see if the situation would suit him for a home. But whether he liked the place or not, the brindled cow never offered to lie down. The cow did seem to be magical, for by now many people were bewitched into following along. They made quite a crowd, and they followed the brindled cow even over rocks and through mud and mire. Cadmus was glad to have people to talk with, and he told them of his adventures as they trudged along. Finally, one day, one of the company cried, "Joy, joy! Brindle is going to lie down!" And sure enough, the brindled cow was slowly reclining herself on the soft grass. "This, then, is to be my home," Cadmus said, gazing around him. It was a fertile and lovely plain with great trees flinging their sun-speckled shadows over it, and hills fencing it in from the rough weather. At no great distance, they beheld a river gleaming in the sunshine. All the companions were just as pleased as Cadmus, and set off immediately to find a spring of water to quench their thirst. But his new friends had not long been gone when Cadmus was startled by shouts, cries, and screams, and the noise of a terrible struggle, and in the midst of it all, a most terrible hissing, which went right through his ears like a rough saw. Running towards the spring, he beheld the head and fiery eyes of an immense dragon, with the widest jaws ever and many rows of horribly sharp teeth. Before Cadmus could reach the spot, this pitiless dragon had killed his companions and was busily devouring them. Drawing his sword, Cadmus rushed at the monster and flung himself right into its cavernous mouth. Thus, though the struggle was a tremendous one, and though the dragon shattered the tuft of trees into small splinters with the thrashing of its tail, Cadmus was all the while slashing at its very vitals. The brave Cadmus gave a sword thrust that finished the battle, and creeping out of the gateway of the dragon's jaws, beheld that the creature was dead. But Cadmus was sorrowful to think of the fate of his companions. It seemed as if he were doomed to lose everybody whom he loved. And here he was, after all his toils and troubles, in a solitary place, with not a single human being to help him build a hut. "What shall I do?" he cried aloud.
"Cadmus," said a voice, "Cadmus, pluck out the dragon's teeth and plant them in the earth."
With great effort, Cadmus drew out the dragon's teeth, using his sword, until one by one he had a bushel or so. Then he planted them in the ground, even though it seemed a foolish thing to do. Quite out of breath, he had waited for a few moments when he began to see a sight which was a great marvel. In the dark soil, he thought he saw something glisten very brightly in one spot, and then another, and then another. A vast number of bright sword blades and spearheads thrust themselves up everywhere like so many stalks of grain. A moment afterwards, a multitude of polished brass helmets came up like a crop of enormous beans. So rapidly did they grow that Cadmus discerned the fierce countenance of a man beneath every one. He beheld an abundant harvest of what looked like human beings, armed with helmets and breastplates, shields, swords, and spears.
"Cadmus,"
Said the same voice he had heard before,
"throw a stone into the midst of the armed men."
So Cadmus seized a large stone, and flinging it into the middle of the earth army, saw it strike a gigantic and fierce-looking warrior. Immediately the warrior uplifted his weapon and smote his neighbor, and stretched him on the ground. In an instant, the warriors began to strike at one another with their swords and stab with their spears, while the trumpeters blew their blasts shriller and shriller. The battle continued to rage without cause, until out of the thousands, only 5 were left standing.
"Cadmus,"
Said the voice again,
"bid those 5 warriors sheathe their swords. They will help you build the city."
Cadmus stepped forward with the aspect of a king and spoke in a stern and commanding voice. "Sheathe your weapons!" Feeling themselves bound to obey him, the 5 remaining sons of the dragon's teeth stood before Cadmus in a rank, eyeing him as soldiers eye their captain, while awaiting the word of command. It was strange to observe how the earth, out of which they had so lately grown, was encrusted here and there on their breastplates, and even begrimed their faces, just as you may have seen it clinging to beets and carrots. "Come," said Cadmus, "you are sturdy fellows. Make yourselves useful. Quarry some stones with those great swords of yours, and help me to build a city." They set to work in good earnest, and toiled so diligently that, in a very short time, a city began to make its appearance. But the palace of Cadmus was not erected until the very last minute, because they meant to introduce all the new improvements of architecture and make it stately and beautiful. On the morning when Cadmus went to the site where the palace was to be built, followed by his 5 sturdy workmen, he saw a most wondrous sight. A magnificent palace had grown up overnight out of the earth. As King Cadmus gazed through the courtyard of the palace, he beheld a wonderfully beautiful woman, adorned with a royal robe and a crown of diamonds. His heart thrilled with delight, and he cried out, "Europa!" "No, Cadmus," said the same voice which had spoken to him in the Field of the Dragon. "I am not your dear sister. I am Harmonia, daughter of the sky, and I will replace your sister, mother, brothers, and boyhood friend." So King Cadmus dwelt in the palace with his new friend, Harmonia. Before many years went by, they were joined by a group of boisterous children. And some say Harmonia invented the alphabet for them, so that stories such as this one might never be forgotten.